Hey everyone, I'm Carlo and I'm here with Dylan. We are All You Can Board, and today we are doing a video about getting into board gaming in 2021. So basically the idea behind this is we are each going to pick 3 games that we think would be an excellent starting point for someone who is either just getting into board gaming for the first time or who's maybe starting their own collection. And we just think of these as kind of like a good starting point. I think we're both trying to sort of cover a lot of bases in terms of player count, different types of games and that sort of thing. And also bearing in mind, we're not trying to suggest any games that are like too expensive or too complicated or anything like that. So
Yeah, maybe you've been maybe you've played some games like going to a friend's place or being invited over or having people over, but you don't own a lot of games yourself, or maybe you own no games yourself. Like, the idea here is that we're each going to give our own perspective of 3 different games each on, a set of 3 games that could potentially be the ones you first buy to start a collection to sort of ease your way into the hobby.
Yeah, and once we've each gone over our 3, we're each going to give you one recommendation as kind of like a next level, next step kind of game as well.
Yeah, more complex.
So without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to Dylan, and he's going to go over his set of 3 first.
All right, so my first of the 3 games, we're going to start with the smallest, is going to be Jaipur. So the reason I put Jaipur, this used to actually be, I shouldn't say used to be a popular game. It is still a popular game, but it actually used to even be on the Board Game Geek Top 100 before it got bumped out. I'm putting Jaipur on here because, first of all, I wanted to put a 2-player game as the first one. I feel like games that play well at 2 are a great place to start because for everyone, it's very easy to just get one. I shouldn't say for everyone, but generally it's easier to get one person together. Sometimes you might even just live with one person already to play a board game than it is to necessarily be like, I'm going to for sure get a game that it plays best at 5 right from the get-go. That could be a tougher sell right from the start. And it's even more imposing to someone who, is just getting into the hobby to think that they have to play with 4 other people at the table with tons of strategy potentially, being thrown around. I think 2 players is a great place to start. And Jaipur is very simple, but it's it's a set collection game, and set collection is something that I feel like a lot of people are aware of, even with just playing cards and different things like that. Like, set collection is something that's easy to wrap your head around, but Jaipur does it in an interesting way with, the way you score from deciding, like, I'm going to collect as many of these red cards as I can. But if all of a sudden my opponent is, I know that they have 3 and they're going for their 4th, I might try to, play my set of 2 red earlier just to snake a couple of the higher value tiles to make it so that they get less points from doing what they're doing. There's some tricky strategical and tactical elements in there that I think will make people learn about some of these strategies you can get from board games in a very simple to understand package. But I think it just will teach you a lot of things that you'll take and use in other games down the road.
Yeah. Even the stuff with the camels, right?
Yeah,
back
exactly.
And forth,
the camels,
managing your resources, kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, managing your hand, managing your resources. You're meant to play Jaipur with 3 rounds, and then totaling the scores. So even if you find that you got really bad luck of the draw with the cards that came out, you can kind of make that up in the next games.
I think it's first person to win 2 rounds.
Yes,
so it could be 2
best
rounds.
2 out of 3.
Yeah,
exactly. So it's a quick playing, quick to learn, quick to teach. It's a small game. If you don't have a collection started, you don't have to feel like I have to find a spot to hold this big game or 3 big games or whatever. It's one that you can easily fit onto a bookshelf or just anywhere in nondescript and feel like, I have my first board game. Let me see if I can hook my partner to this, if I can get hooked into it, whatever the case may be. I think it's a good place to start, and it's going to teach you a lot of things that you'll carry over into other board games, but very not imposing as a beginning spot for you. Yep. So that's Jaipur. Nice. The next one I would say is the next step I would take, and this is a bit of a bigger box, is the quest for El Dorado. So the reason I'm using this one, and this one is definitely a more involved experience than Jaipur, but it's a deck builder, and there are a lot of deck building games out there, and I would say that if you have no interest whatsoever in card games, obviously then these 2 picks are pretty bad for you. But in general, you're going to find that some of the most popular games in board gaming are deck builders to some extent, or use deck building aspects. A game like Dominion is where a lot of people I know will start with deck builders, or will say is one of the definitive deck builders. Mm-hmm. I think that El Dorado is, in my opinion, the best place to start if you're trying to learn about deck building, which is a more complex genre of board games than something like set collection or hand management. It's very the decks are very small to start. The cards have very simple to understand abilities. This card is going to make you cross water. This card's going to make you cross sand. This card's going to make you cross grass or forests or whatever. They have their simple functions. There are ability cards that start very simple and then sort of get more complex as they go, but not everything in the market is available at once. You don't have to necessarily be looking at it being like, I can buy anything here. It's just whatever people have been have made available by what they've purchased. So you never feel like your choices are too many, that it gets overwhelming for a first time player.
Agreed.
we can all relate to having as kids having played board games that have to do with just traveling a map. I think like games like Candyland, games like Sorry, and like basically most children's board games. I had a Pokemon board game that was the same thing. Like you're usually moving around a map in some way, and you'll land on a space and you push someone back, whatever. El Dorado is not that simplistic, but it has that race aspect that I think a lot of us can relate to. That, for you getting into board gaming, for someone you want to introduce it to, it's an easy sell to say, hey, you're just moving along this board. First player to the end wins. That concept is so easy to understand. It's the deck building that's sort of introducing to this new aspect that's like, yes, that's what we're all familiar with board games growing up, but here's this new aspect, and you're going to take that new aspect from this experience and what you've learned and be able to take it into more complex and more interesting games. Not more interesting, this is very interesting, but just other games that use deck building, like a game like Lost Ruins of Arnak, which uses deck building, but I would never say should be your starting point. A game like this is going to help you get there and feel very at home and very ready to learn a game like that, because of how easy it teaches. I know that this is one of your favorite games too.
Yeah, it's definitely high on your list. Especially deck builders, absolutely. And I think when we're talking deck builders, you mentioned, I think the only ones that are simpler that we really like are like something like Hero Realms, but this doesn't have that much more complexity, and I think is definitely a step up and is so much better that this is a great pick. I think it plays really well at all player counts too, right? You may mention that how when you play with two players, you each have two figures on the map, right? So you can be blocking each other a lot. So it's more of that player interaction if you play with two. It's really interesting.
The word gateway games gets thrown around a lot, and we purposely didn't use that term necessarily here because I think that encompasses so many different things. But in many ways, if I was using that term, I would almost say that this is a great modern day gateway game, because it's one that if I was having people over who had never played board games before, I would feel confident teaching them, and I would feel confident that they would be able to grasp. And even if you don't completely understand the nuances of deck building, I know that the first time I played deck builders with you, or even I think it was with you, the first time I saw someone really thinning out their deck, right, and really using the spots in the map, or in this case, or in the the abilities in other games where you can eliminate the trash cards from your hand and from your deck to make it so that you get to the better cards quicker. That took me a while to wrap my head around, even coming from games like Magic the Gathering and everything like that. Like deck thinning is a concept that you're not it's not gonna click the first time. But I find that you don't necessarily have to completely understand all that the first time you play to do well or to have a good experience here. And as you see other people doing that, you might have the situation arise where someone says, well, why would you want to do that? Why are you eliminating cards in your deck? And you can easily explain, you can easily see the benefit of having a thin deck and how quick you're getting through the good cards. So it's just, I think it's a great gateway game, if we are going to use that term. And it's just a great game to move from having had this two-player, very intimate experience to moving to this more involved experience, but not too involved that it's going to alienate anyone, I would say.
And I think if you're only going to have a certain number of games in your collection, like you're starting with a small number of games, is great because there's the map is variable and different every time, so you can play it and see totally different races every time that you're going through the map. And I think also for newer players, the games are very tight. How many times have we both made it to the end and it comes down to the tiebreaker, right? Which you want games for newer players who are just getting into the hobby to be close. You don't want someone to just wipe the floor with their opponents. So this is an awesome pick. This was almost on my 3, so I'm glad it made yours.
So that is El Dorado, and the last one I'm going to suggest as one of the games you could start your collection with is going to be Quacks of Quedlinburg. So Quacks is on this list because out of them all, I think it's the most just pure fun. I think that, again, what's interesting about this pick is that I know that there's going to be some debate from some people, or there is already a discussion on these types of games of, whether the luck element is too overwhelming, or whether it's, too luck based of a game to say either to start a collection with, or to even just play if you're someone who cares about strategy and being able to rely on how well you played and not just the luck of the draw and stuff. But with Quacks, what I find is that it's so fun, and there's so much hilarity, and there's so much watching what other people are doing, and it becomes an experience that I think it's more than a party game by far, but it gives you a lot of the same feelings you get from the fun that goes around a table when you're playing a party game. And I think that there is enough complexity in learning some of the aspects of Quacks and the way it plays, and how to best build your bag. It's on a deck builder, but it starts to sort of teach you that, hey, you can take this concept and it's malleable. Deck building is with a deck, but the tools and the things you do to be good at a deck builder translate into a bunch of other areas. And I almost consider putting Cubitos on here, but that one I felt like was too similar. It has the race element from El Dorado,
right,
but without the cards. This has, the bag builder instead of the deck builder. I just feel like Quacks is a better place to start, and I have more fun, I think, playing Quacks than I do Cubitos. But again, it's similar in a lot of ways to El Dorado, so I feel like if you've gone from Jaipur to El Dorado, it's not a tough sell to go from El Dorado to Quacks, where you're going from a deck builder to a bag builder. You're just losing some of the strategy of like building your deck and translating into a bag, and it's more, I would say, luck driven than drawing cards at the top.
Yeah.
Like you're not really thinning. I guess there are ways to eliminate some things from your bag in Quacks, but it's not very common. It's not like
No, it's
I'm
pretty
gonna thin
rare,
out my bag so it's just the good tokens or whatever.
No,
right?
it is more like you said about it's the what makes this game what is it's the excitement. It's the tension of like reaching into the bag and not knowing what you're gonna get. And I think for new players that's something that is really exciting. But like you said, there's enough still to consider with if you fall behind on the score, you can get those rat tails, which give you more stuff to spend on what you buy, right? So there's still some good gameplay there, even though it is fairly beginner friendly.
Yeah, and another reason I put Quacks in here is less because I think it functions as a gateway game, more because I think it's just a good game for someone to have in their collection. So we're talking about 3 games to start a collection with. I think this is a game that you'll find that having in your collection, a lot of people are going to like it. Everyone who I've introduced this to has requested to play it again, has had a lot of fun playing it, and has even pointed out after, remember that game we played? What was it called again? Because it's a really tough name to remember. It's just really, really fun. So I think if you're wanting to have a collection that you can start introducing to other people, you want to have games that you can, reliably bring out that people are going to want to play. And I think that Quacks has a pretty good track record in my experience of being one that if I suggest it, or if people find out I have, they're pretty excited that they can play it. The only thing I'll say about it is, and I've heard this leveled against it, is the setup can be, a bit long. It's over. There's a lot of setup because of how many tokens are in the game. And if you really, really enjoy it in your collection, you don't want to have a big collection, you're fine with these games, you could even take the next step and get the upgraded components for Quacks, because the upgraded components are amazing. And you can have them all in their separate bag and stuff like that. But another good thing, the last thing I'll mention is with both of these games, this could be your first foray into board game expansions. So there are board game expansions for both of these. So if you want to, start moving on from these but not fully commit to a 4th game, or building your collection too big with unique experiences, you can say, hey, we play a lot of El Dorado, let's try the expansion, and you have that option. I think there's 2 expansions for El Dorado, and there's a second one coming for Quacks, I think either this year or next year. Yep. So you have the option of saying like, hey, I just want to keep expanding the experience we have. You have those options here as well. So these are the 3 games that I would say are my recommendations to start a collection with. Again, by no means definitive, everyone's different. And I tried to be a little bit different than the ones you were constantly seeing talked about, things like Catan and Ticket to Ride. We wanted to have sort of a 2021 modern approach with some new games, some like old games that aren't like not super old or whatever. And I think this is a nice balance. It's going to get you with a nice start in your collection that you're going to have a lot of fun with, but also you're going to have fun introducing to other people.
I'm gonna put you on the spot here for one quick sec because, and then I'm gonna ask you to do the same for me. But if there was one, and this is a tough question to answer because like with only 3 games, it's impossible to cover every base. Yeah. Is there a base that you feel this doesn't cover? Is there a blind spot in this? Right. Because I know I definitely have one in my 3 afterwards.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know what would be the most obvious one, but I think that the fact that we have a deck builder and a bag builder and a 2-player game, there's tons of genres not covered here, and one that you're going to see pop up a lot in a lot of games is as a worker placement. Worker placement is one of my favorite genres of games. It's kind of funny I didn't include it here, but I think worker placement is one that I didn't, even though it's one of my favorite genres, that's not where I particularly started with board games. So I feel like it's not necessarily where I would say you have to start your collection with, but it's something you definitely want to consider branching out into after the fact. That's not covered here. I think that if you're wanting to like learn that mechanic and have it, that understanding translate into a bunch of different games, that's probably not covered here. That's probably the biggest omission for me personally because of how much I like that genre. But that being said, there are a lot of genres not covered by this list that you're going to have to consider branching out to learn. Some I think are covered in Carlo's, but again, these are supposed to be separate.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
That's the biggest omission I would say on my end.
Okay,
good question.
Fair enough.
I like that question. Okay. That was like interrogative reporting.
Okay, yeah.
On the spot too. I
was gonna say, yeah, fair enough.
Good call. So yeah, now we'll go on to Carlos.
All right, so now we're gonna kick it off with my 3. I'm gonna do these from oldest to newest. We're gonna start with a very old game, but one of my absolute favorites. This is Modern Art, designed by Rainer Knizia. It's been published tons of versions. This one is the newer one by Simon Games. I think this came out in 1993. This is an auction game. and I can't believe I went so long before playing this. This game is amazing. The long and short of it is everyone is playing as sort of an auction house. You have a little private screen to shield your money. Everyone starts with the equal amount of money and a hand of cards, and the cards are just paintings from different artists that have a different color and a type of auction. And on your turn, you play a card and hold an auction for that painting. It goes around the table. There's different types of auctions. So the game has 5 different types of auctions. You can have like the open auctions where it's just, like an auction house. Oh, the highest bid is 5. Can I get a 6? Oh, I hear 6 over here, whatever. There's hidden auctions where everyone puts a secret amount of money in their hand and then all open their hand at the same time and the highest bid wins. There's a single price auction where you set a price and see if people want to buy it. There's all kinds of different auctions in this game. So it's very interactive. There's the fluctuating economy because if you end up buying your own paintings, you pay that money to the bank. But if you're buying them from someone else, you pay that money to the player. And it's a very interactive game. We were talking about this the other day about how we I think we're a bit late on auction games. We played games that had auction mechanisms fairly early on, like Keyflower and stuff like that. But in terms of like games that are auction games, I was late to the party on modern art, and now this is like, no questions asked, this is in my top 10 of all time. I don't know exactly how high yet, but every time I've played this, I'm just, like, my mind is blown at how well it works. I think the rulebook is like 4 pages. It's crazy. It makes no sense to me how there's 5 types of auctions and all this complexity after so many plays, but this is like one of those game design achievements that I just think is amazing. And again, the reason why I mentioned the 4-page rulebook is just, again, if you're starting a collection, it's a game that anyone I think can learn the rules too quickly enough, teach a group of players, and pick up and play. This goes 3 to 5 players, so you cannot play this as a 2-player game. I realize that's a bit of if you play the majority of your games at 2 players, obviously this isn't going to be the best fit for you. But I think if you ever play with 3 or more, it's such a good game that's just going to fill a niche in your collection, especially if you're looking for an auction game. In my opinion, this is the best one. And the thing is, it teaches you about auctions, right? So if you're getting into the hobby, this is kind of a springboard to get into other auction games. Now you're going to go play, whatever, For Sale or Isle of Skye or Power Grid or whatever. And now you have this basis of all these auctions that you've kind of learned about. So, and it plays in like 45 minutes to an hour. It's such a good game. There's so much depth that reveals itself after repeated plays. It's just one that I'll definitely never get rid of this, and I think it's an excellent game that anyone could have in their collection, and it's very affordable too. I think this version was like $30-$35 or something.
And it's also just like, it's one of those games where if this was the first game someone introduced me after I had come from, maybe just having played Ticket to Ride or like obviously Monopoly, Scrabble, and everything like that, it is one of those ones that gives you this exact mind blown experience of like, this is how much more board gaming can be. I think that's something
it's an eye opener for the hobby.
And I think that even more so than the ones that I picked, except for maybe Quacks in some ways, I think that having that eye opening experience is something that actually hooks people into the hobby. I think that's what Catan accomplished a lot of back in the day, that it became like this staple gateway game. I think the modern art is one that, even having played as many games as we did, that the first time I played it, it blew my mind a bit, some of the things that were happening.
Right.
I think having that experience, if you were invited over and you played it and you were taught the rules, to be like, wow, I didn't realize board gaming could do this stuff too. It could be the one that hooks people into the hobby, or just like, it's one that I think you would never regret having in your collection, right?
And it is a game, like, depending how into it you get. My wife always makes fun of me when we play this because this game probably makes me sweat more than any other. Like, it's agonizing. It's just like the sweat pouring down my face. I'm just like, how much do I price this painting at, or do I buy this myself? Like, it gets you really involved. And the thing is, there's not really much downtime, because even if you're out of the auction and you've passed, it's so entertaining to watch other people outbid each other and go at it. So it's just a very involved, fun game, start to finish. Can't recommend this enough. So that is Modern Art. That's the first one on my list. Next up, we are skipping from 1993 way ahead to 2018 to a game by the same designer, once again, Dr. Rainer Knizia. This is Blue Lagoon, and this one's published by Blue Orange Games. So this is a 2 to 4 player abstract tile laying game. So the idea is each player starts with a certain number of tokens as their little settlers. And I'm going to show you the back of the box real quick. There's a board that has basically a little island, and there's like water spots in these little islands, and you're basically laying down your little settler tokens one at a time on your turn. You just put one down, and the game plays in 2 phases, where the first phase you also have these little huts. There's 5 of them that you're placing throughout. And then you score based on the scoring conditions there. You wipe the board, and then you repopulate for a second round, but you basically leave out the little huts that players had. And then in the second phase of the game, the settlement phase, you can only build out from your huts. So where I think this is great as a starting game is, first off, it plays really well at 2, 3, and 4 players. I think 3 and 4 is probably best, but it is still really good with 2. Again, similar to modern art, is it kind of like teaches you about a lot of other mechanisms that will lead into other games. So you have obviously your tiling with your tokens. You've got area majority stuff where at the end of the game, because there's all these different scoring conditions, right? Who has the most pieces on an island? Okay, the majorities. Then you're getting points for connecting your longest route. How many islands do you touch with that longest route? So you've got kind of network and route building stuff. You've got set collection with the resources you're trying to collect. If you collect 2 of a certain resource or 3 or 4, you get more points. So there's all these little things it's teaching you, and similar to modern art, it's like a 3 or 4 page rule book, plays in 30 to 45 minutes. Could take a little longer sometimes, especially as a teaching game. I think it could go closer to an hour sort of thing.
I think it also, like, one thing it does really well, it pops up in a lot of games that this would be a good thing to teach people with a game like this is, I wouldn't necessarily, I don't know if I would classify it as a point salad game, but having the aspect of where you have multiple ways to score your points, that comes up in some of the most popular board games in the hobby. And there's a bunch of different scoring categories in Blue Lagoon, and you can't really do them all effectively. So teaching you and learning that, like, I have to be able to spread myself a little bit thin, but also prioritize and make sure I'm getting enough points here. Like, I have to make it onto all these islands while also keeping a chain together, while also making sure that I get majority here. That is something that is going to pop up in some of our favorite games. And if you're wanting to get into the hobby, learning it with a game like Blue Lagoon is a lot easier than learning it with a game like Feast for Odin, right?
Yes.
So
because on here, even though there's a lot of different places you might be able to go on your turn is simple. You're just placing one piece. Like, you can't do anything else. You just place a piece. If there's a little good resource under it, you take it. And if you're just deciding, am I placing a settler or a village? But the turns go super quick, but there's a lot to consider. You're trying to, again, like you said, which scoring conditions do you want to go for? Because that usually means you're going to be ignoring other scoring conditions. So it's a great game. It teaches you, again, the 2 phases. So there's some planning, because you're going to strategize in the first round. Oh, if I put this hut here, is it going to help me? Do I want to build out from there in the next phase? So I think it's a really, really good game. The only thing that some people might not like for a beginner thing is, like, the scoring it's really high scoring games. It's only the scores are like 200-300, and you're adding all these. It's very mathy, kind of adding up the scoring. But other than that, I'd say it's a really good game and one that's very easy to get into.
Another reason I love that you put this on this list is because one that I would have included on my list had it been widely available is Fjords, and it's going to be more available. But I think that, like, Fjords teaches a lot of the same mechanics Blue Lagoon does, and even like the original in a very even simpler package. You can't buy it. It's unavailable until this new printing comes out. But I think Blue Lagoon does a lot of the same things. So I'm glad it's on here, because those type of games just are really effective as teaching you something, but also just like in your collection to sort of like wrap your head around those mechanics. Yeah.
And it is abstract, but it still has a nice theme, nice artwork. So it's not going to be a hard sell for people who are new to games. Like, it kind of almost looks like the movie like Moana, right? The island is very colorful. So it's just a great little package, and very similar price point to modern art. I think this is like a $30-$35 game. So one of the cheapest games you can get that is actually a board game still, that isn't just like a card game or something. So Blue Lagoon, highly recommend it. And my third and final pick here is going to be The Crew, The Quest for Planet 9. Maybe I should hold this further back. The Crew, The Quest for Planet 9, designed by Thomas Singh and published by Cosmos. So this is a fairly new game. This was I believe it was released in Europe in 2019 and then in North America in 2020. The reason why it's on, there's so many reasons actually. First off, not only is it the best cooperative game I've played, but it's also the best trick-taking game I've played. It's the best limited or restricted communication game I've played. It just does so many things well. And, like, again, look at the size of this box. This is like a $15 game or something. It's ridiculous how much is packed into here. But it's basically 50 missions where you're playing cooperatively. Everyone has a hand of cards. They basically just have numbers and colors on them, and you can't communicate with your teammates, I guess, other than you have this little communication token that you can use once per round, that you can play a card face up and put the token somewhere to kind of indicate some sort of message. I'm not going to get all into the rules. We have how to play video on our channel, which we'll link up here somewhere if you want to check it out. You can also try it for free on Board Game Arena before considering getting the game. So it does play mostly 3 to 5 players. There is a 2-player variant in the game. We haven't tried it yet. I don't think the game would be quite as good with 2.
I've heard some people say that they actually really like it at 2, but for me, what we have, I think, get out of this experience is having more people, because it makes it a little trickier, and you have like more people that you're almost having to be on the same wavelength with, and understand what they're thinking and things like that. And it makes it more exciting for us. But the fact that it still functions as two, it's not listed as two, but there's a 2-player variant, also makes it that like, as a game you're saying to have in your collection, you have the option to play it at 2 as well, right?
Yeah, and it's like, I hesitated, so there's like, it's not quite a legacy or a campaign game, but there are the progressive missions that you try out. So you can play with the same group, play 5 missions. Next time they come over, you can pick up on mission number 6 and continue and whatever. Yeah. And the other thing is, I wanted a cooperative game on my list, but I know that sometimes cooperative games in new groups don't always go over particularly well, especially if the game is prone to what we call quarterbacking, where someone can take over and say, you can say on your turn you want to do this, and someone can say, oh yeah, but if we do this instead, this will be better. And you just go, okay, I guess we'll just do it.
Feels like they're playing for you.
Yeah, exactly. They're making your decisions. Whereas in this, because you can't really communicate other than sending a secret message with your cards once in the round, everyone is responsible for their own thing. And even if as a group you fail the mission, it only takes like 5 or 10 minutes. You usually just laugh about it and say, oh, but I was trying to send a message and communicate this to you, and oh, okay, I misinterpreted it as this. And you laugh about it and you go over the results, and then you just kind of redeal the round and you start over. So it's very easy to get back into again, you can just sit down and play 1 or 2 rounds. You can make a whole game out of this. A lot of that time it happens unexpectedly, right? We're like, let's play a couple rounds of the crew, and then you get hooked and you just play round after round.
How many missions have we played now?
It's the debrief after that's always my favorite part. Oh, when you played that, I knew to do this and whatever. It does so much with so little. This is again one of those just like brilliant achievements in game design, and I think it's a good starting point for all those categories. Again, cooperative, limited communication, trick taking. It's a really, really good game, and for the price point, you won't find many better sort of like bang for your buck games out there.
And I love that this is pretty much I'll say this because everyone knows now if you watch the channel, I know Carlo does, I love campaign games. I love games that inspire you to come back and play with the same group, and you have this like story you've told over a lot of time. I think the crew is like the very, 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 very first step on the journey of potentially seeing if that's for you, because it incentivizes you to come back with the same group, like Carlo was saying, because you want to see if you can do all the missions with the same group and be like, hey, we conquered the game. Right. That's the first step on sort of realizing, hey, board games don't have to be this one-off experience. I can schedule a regular board game night with the same group, and we meet over the same game, and do it with very like quick playing experiences and stuff like that. You can play other games at the same time, and if it's working for you, if you guys are like, man, I really like that we have this thing that we all meet and gather around, maybe you take the next step up, and next thing you know, one day you're doing in a 2-year Gloomhaven campaign and you're completely in the hobby, right? So I like that this is sort of like introducing that aspect of board gaming, because it's one of my favorite things about it. So.
Right, for sure. That's my 3. Do you like?
No, I think those are solid picks. I think you should definitely, since you put me on the spot, I think you should definitely tell me what you think is lacking in your picks. And then,
I think there's 2 things lacking in my picks. Something that your list did a much better job of is 2 of my technically you can play this with 2 players, but I wouldn't recommend it. And modern art cannot be played with 2 players. So if you do the majority of your gaming with like your significant other at home or a roommate or a friend, if you do a lot of 2-player gaming, I don't think this is going to be the ideal list. Blue Lagoon is really good at 2 players. It's a great one. But again, if you do most of your gaming at 2 players, then these ones aren't maybe the best recommendations, the crew and modern art. But they go up to 5. That's why I included these. Is a lot of people say, I want to have at least one game that can play over 4 players. So this and modern art both do go up to 5.
And maybe this is the one you start with, because it is the most inviting artwork, I would say. It's the one that plays very well at 2. I think this is, if you like, in my opinion, if we were saying these are the 3 you can potentially start with, I would almost say Blue Lagoon is the first one you get, and then you get one of the other ones when you're ready to introduce that third person, or if you already have that third person, whatever the case may be. Maybe you then go to the crew because it still has the 2-player option, and then you end with modern art, which blows people's minds in the board gaming experience. There's valid reasons for all of them.
But like you said on your list, I also really like worker placement games, and I also couldn't really justify putting one in here. So there's no worker placement, and there's also no tableau building games in here, which I also love. But sometimes those are a little more complex. A lot of my favorite tableau builders are just kind of like a step up in terms of complexity. But it's really hard to narrow down to just 3 games to cover all your bases kind of thing. But this was the best I could do. So.
Well, I think it's great picks. So now we're going to jump into the games that we specifically think is the next step if you're wanting something a little bit more complex. All right, so again, just to clarify, this game is not part of the first three. This is sort of what we think our next step is. So this is, hey, the first three worked for you and you're fully hooked on the hobby or you're getting there. What's the next step you can take that adds to the complexity and sort of gives you some new things to learn about board gaming and starts to like really flesh out what you can expect from board games. So my pick for that is going to be a tried and true classic of mine, one of my favorites, which is the Castles of Burgundy. So I've talked about this game a lot on the channel in different videos and all over the place. I love this game. It's one of my favorites. The reason I'm putting it on here is because I think that it's not a hard one to get into as a next step if you've played a lot of the other games I've listed here, if you've played some of the games Carlo's listed, if you've played other games similar in complexity to those. I think it's taking you in the right direction of learning about some more complex games and Stefan Feld has some even just on his own as a designer, but even some other bigger box games that you'll see on the shelf back here. I think this is sort of the next right step in that direction. So this is a dice drafting game, which is, you're rolling dice and you're using the numbers that you specifically rolled to carry out specific actions based on the numbers that are on them. But you have ways to manipulate the dice to eliminate some of the luck aspect. So when you're coming from a game like Quacks, it's very luck based. It's kind of interesting to come to Castle of Burgundy and have this aspect of dice where you think it's all luck-based, and then you sort of start to learn, you can have these mechanics where you can sort of circumvent the luck and say, well, I didn't roll the number I want, but I'm going to use this worker to change it into the number I want. But that's a limited resource, and how do I manage those resources? So I think that that's a cool next step coming from Quacks specifically. But I think that this is, it's not a worker placement game, but I think it's sort of taking you closer down the road towards them. And I think that this is sort of going to teach you some of the mechanics that you'll be able to sort of take into worker placement and say, hey, there's no dice in this and it functions differently because I'm placing them here, but I understand now how I'm getting there. I can see my footprints on this road and it's starting to make sense. So I mean, for me, I just love Castle of Burgundy, so any chance I can get to sort of if you have one of the people that have not tried it to sort of sell you on it is great. Another really good aspect of this is that it plays fantastic, I think, at 2. So it's another game that's sort of if you're wanting a game in your collection that is the next step, but still you can play with one person as well, so you don't have to necessarily feel like you have to get a full group together. Castle of Burgundy is going to be really, really great that way. There's also the fact that there's so many different powers and combos that you really have to start, you can play it without having a lot of, feeling like you have to get really into the strategy and you can have a great time. But it's a game that if you play it a bunch, you're going to learn more strategies as you go, and you're going to feel like you're getting better at it, and you're going to take that sort of mindset that you're learning with board games into other games that you play in the future. And the way you, plan your board, there's after you've played it a bunch, you can start using the more complex versions of the boards as well. Yeah. So
I think it takes on an interesting dynamic if you were to, and you would know more than me, but playing it with the same person too, getting to know each other's tendencies a little bit and learning the game together and being on the same kind of level. So I think it's a good one that rewards repeated plays for sure.
Yeah, and it incentivizes you to score your points early, which is something that doesn't pop up in a lot of games, but it makes you rethink the way you score. A lot of board games, if you're getting right into this hobby, for a lot of these early games you might have been playing in your life, it's just, you score points consistently throughout. Sometimes you get more, sometimes you get less, and at the end, whoever has the most points wins. The fact that this makes you rethink when you score your points and how they're going to earn you is not present in all games, but it does teach you that, hey, scoring isn't always going to be as bare bones or as simplistic, as one-dimensional as you might have, discovered it to be so far. Right. This is sort of teaching you something new about scoring as well. So I think so much of what you learn from Castle of Burgundy, even if the mechanics aren't the exact same, you're going to carry over into other experiences, and it's going to sort of really open this. For me, this is the game on my list that was closest to Carlos' pick of modern art, of that mind-blown experience. For me, I feel like I waited until the next level game to blow your mind, because this is where the door opens and you're like, oh my god, there's so many things in this one game alone, who knows what else is out there, right? Yeah. So yeah, that's Castle of Burgundy. I think that if you are successfully into this hobby now, either from this list or from other games you've experienced, and you're wanting to know what your next step into more complex, Euro style games and everything should be, Castle of Burgundy would be an excellent next step for you.
Yeah. Very nice pick.
Thanks.
All right, and we're going to move on to my sort of next step pick, which is Agricola, designed by Uwe Rosenberg. This version is published by Z-Man Games. There's a revised edition too, where they've kind of updated and slimmed out some of the cards that came out a little more recently. This was from 2008, I believe. This is one of my favorite games of all time. Might even be my favorite. It's hard to say. I haven't played it as much in the past few years, but I've had this game for about 10 years. This was my next level game, okay? I got into board gaming with stuff like Carcassonne, Settlers of Catan, Ticket to Ride, Pandemic, that kind of stuff. And then I saw Agricola at the store one day. It caught my eye. I didn't even know who Uwe Rosenberg was at the time. I was just getting into games. And I have to say, some people might disagree with this as being a next step pick, because this is almost like 2 steps up from the games I'm talking about in terms of, like, it's not that it's necessarily super hard to learn. It's just a very tough game to do well at. It's very punishing, very unforgiving. There's all these upkeep things you have to, basically the idea is you're farming, and it is a worker placement game. We were talking about, we hadn't covered any yet, but this is a worker placement game where each player has a little board that represents their farm. You have a house with 2 little wooden rooms, and you have 2 people in your house, your 2 workers, and there's basically a board with all these action spaces, and you take one of your workers, put them on a space, do what it says. Either you pick up some resources, or you get to play an occupation card from your hand, or whatever. There's all kinds of stuff you can do. You can collect animals and put them in little stables or pens in your place. You can then cook them for food to feed your family. You can grow and plant vegetables and whatever. It's, you're farming. But throughout the game, there's a certain number of these harvests, and every time there's a harvest, you have to feed each of your workers 2 food. And if you don't have the food to feed them, they basically starve, and you get negative points. And it's a huge setback. Like -3 points is a lot to lose in this game. Yeah. So it is and all these conditions at the end of the game, like, if you have 0 animals, you get negative a point. If you don't have any vegetables, you lose a point. There's all these things that are like, it just feels so punishing. But part of the game is figuring out when to take that risk and like try to get an extra worker, a 3rd worker, a 4th worker, because it lets you take more actions. But then you have more upkeep. You got to start having more food for them, and if you can't feed them, the penalties might be larger. So it's kind of a game of seeing how much you want to push your boundaries and how bold you want to be and how much you think you can get done. And it's one of those games when the game ends, you always feel like you didn't quite have enough turns. You didn't get anything done or everything done that you wanted to do. But even if you lose, you have this thing in front of you that you see, that you look at, and you're like, I totally grew my board from the start. Like, you went from this open board with this tiny little house with 2 people, and you probably have 3 or 4 people now, and you built this bigger house. Maybe you upgraded it to clay or stone, whatever. This game has so much going on for it. It has worker placement, it has resource management, it has push your luck with letting the action spaces accumulate with more resources, and you can let them sit there and sit, and you think, oh, I'll wait till that has 6 wood next round, and then someone takes that from you, so you don't even get that next round. There's all these little timing issues, but there's also a card system where you play cards that help you out throughout the game. It's a game that there is long-term strategy, because at the start you have all your cards from the start, and you kind of have to decide, what am I going to plan, what am I going to prioritize, what's going to be my food engine for the game. And this plays 1 to 5 players, so part of the reason this made my list too, again, I thought not to include it because it is a bit heavier and fairly punishing, but the fact that it's honestly amazing at 2 to 5. Every player count I love. I think it's best at 4, and I also really like it at 2. 3 is where it's most punishing, so if you don't like that punishing aspect of people not being able to feed their families or not having the resources they want, I'd say play it mostly at 2 or at 4, because that's where the resources feel a little more plentiful. People feel like they can all get things done a little more. But I think the main reason I've included this as well is because there's a solo mode. So if you feel like it is a bit overwhelming, the solo mode has almost the identical rules to the rest of the game. You're just trying to sort of beat your high score. So it's an easy one to like learn on your own, play the solo mode a couple times, and then to teach it to other people. You don't need to like learn a different rule set. It's pretty much the same game. Yeah. I played this, I still have the score sheet to log in. I think I played it like over 120 times in the first 5 years I had the game. Most of my friends have played it tons of times and love it too. It's just such a great game. It's my favorite Uwe Rosenberg game. It's my favorite worker placement game. And again, it is definitely a step above. Like, I think Dylann's pick of Castles of Burgundy is a better, like a more gradual pick for sure. So
you might go Burgundy to Agricola.
Yeah, maybe. So like definitely keep that in mind that this is another step up. But for the long-term reward it gets you, I think if you're open to that kind of like maybe an added level of complexity and you can get past the kind of like meanness and punishing difficult factor of the game, I think it is going to reward you a lot long term. So
I think there's 2 really good things or interesting things it teaches you too, and one is that board games can be mean, yes. But mean in a good way, I would say.
Yeah, that the punishing part can still be satisfying and rewarding to overcome or whatever.
Yeah, maybe it's not for everybody, but I feel like for us, like something we learned over time is that mean games are like done in the right way can be super rewarding, because having those grueling decisions are something make you want to come back to them. It makes you realize, oh, I wonder if I would have made this decision differently, or like next time I'm going to try doing this, or I got to think about it this way.
Yeah, and before you get to your second point, I want to mention the meanness isn't like you can't just like burn down your opponent's farm.
Yeah.
It's just like if you see that they need wood to build something, you can go and take that wood first. So it's more like you're getting in each other's way and taking something that someone else wants, rather than you're not going to someone's farm and attacking them.
Yeah. And the second most important point that I want to point out that I think that this teaches you is that board game titles are never what they seem, because Carlo called this Agricola or Agricola for the entire time and only had to force himself to call it Agricola recently in the last couple of years.
It's true.
So it teaches you to never guarantee what a game is called, because it is not Agricola, even though in our hearts I think it'll always be Agricola.
It's true. It's a shame I carry with myself this day that I called it Agricola for so long. I kept thinking agriculture, Agricola. Why is it Agricola? I don't say agriculture, so why is it
agriculture?
Right? Let us know. I guess it's a German Agricola, or like, right. I don't know.
Let us know in the comments if you ever called this Agricola to make Carlo feel better,
or Agricola,
No. Right, yes, right.
Yeah,
let us know if you ever called it Agricola, and if that'll make Carlo feel better for calling it that for so long, or if you were always calling it Agricola and you have no idea what we're talking about. Let us know in the comments. I'm really curious. So.
Yeah. And the other thing is, don't ever judge a game by its cover, because again, like even just looking at the front cover, similar to Castles of Burgundy, it's like it's just some like. She doesn't even look all that impressed. She's just kind of staring at this sheep. It's a boring looking farm, whatever. But the game's amazing. Same with Castles of Burgundy. It's just
there's tons of games that like Le Havre and stuff like that. Like, the box art is just like, it's nothing that you would ever necessarily expect getting into the hobby that is going to be interesting. Yeah. Dominion is another example.
Yes.
We should do a list one day that's just like top 10 games that don't judge a book by their cover games.
Yeah, the biggest discrepancy between how ugly the box and how good the game is. Yeah.
There's a bunch out there.
For sure.
Some really bad vendors. But.
So yeah, that was my next step recommendation. That is Agricola by Uwe Rosenberg.
Great pick. So those are our games that we think would be great to get into the hobby in 2021. Again, by no means definitive. This is just my picks and Carlos' picks to say here's some directions you can go. Completely malleable to a couple of these games might work for you, a couple might not. But if you're someone watching this and you've either thought about getting into the hobby, or maybe you just played at other people's houses and you started checking things out on YouTube because you wanted to see like what's all this about. I played this game. I didn't expect that board games could be this. Here's some games you might want to consider checking out or starting with to see if you can get hooked as well. Maybe you'll be like us and we still play video games, but we definitely deviated away from the digital games and went to more of the tabletop games over the last X amount of years because we like the social interaction and we were surprised by how much board gaming could offer, right?
Absolutely.
So those are our picks. Let us know in the comment what you think about our picks, and also let us know in the comments which game got you into the hobby, especially if it's something different than the ones you always hear about, like Carcassonne and Catan and Ticket to Ride. Like if there was a specific game that was your first game that you started with, I'd be really interested to hear what everyone's first game is, because everyone's is different. Mine was Pandemic. It was my first one. Yours was Carcassonne. Some of those are both common picks. Let us know if you have especially for modern day. I'm really curious what people are getting into the hobby with these days. So let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear.
And for those of you who have played a decent amount of games, let us know if you had to have a set of 3 that covers a lot of bases. Like we both found it really tough. We both know there's things that we overlooked and games we wanted to make on this list, but if you can only pick 3 to cover as many bases as possible, it is really tough. So we'd love to hear what sort of set of 3 games you'd recommend as a starter kit for someone getting into the hobby.
And there's so many other ones we considered. I know you considered Tiny Towns. I considered Azul. I considered Sagrada. There's tons of options that would have made sense. It's just we had to narrow it down to 3. We gave ourselves that restriction to work within. So let us know. And like Carlos said, I'd love to hear what you have on your list.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.
See ya.